Hi, I'm Turiya Wildrose. I'm coming on because I have a strong intuition that I would like to share my heart more. And I'm coming out of a 36-hour fast, so my energy is a little bit tired. My intention is to share from my heart, and I'm going to let go of any perfectionism and how this channel comes through, um, and just see where it goes. It feels very feminine, it feels very non-linear. So I just invite you to be curious with me if you're willing, and just lean in to how this story and this messaging lands in your own body, and see if there's anywhere in your life where this story and this messaging relates. So, I have been feeling into a very important spiritual figure in my life, and she is Mary Magdalene. I have been on a path of self-discovery, maybe like you, for many years now, but perhaps more intensely since 2016, when I had a dark night of the soul and I decided to go to a Buddhist retreat. And I loved it so much that eventually I became a disciple of Buddhism under Master Jin Bodhi. Maybe some of you are familiar with him. He has a temple in Richmond. And while that path awoke my Kundalini energy in a very powerful way, I remember after one meditation session, I went home and there was a fire in my belly. Fire in my belly. And I went back the next day and we had these talks with the master, and I let him know what had happened. And he just looked at me and said, "Congratulations." He wasn't willing to tell me what was happening, but to offer an invitation to discover what had happened. And so I carried on in my discipleship until something in me felt off. I didn't feel resonant anymore with other paths that were calling me. And part of this was reconnecting with my Indigenous roots since 2010, and participating in Sundance ceremonies and UEP ceremonies and Anipi ceremonies. All of that was beautiful and connective and enlivening as well. And yet, once again, there was something that felt off in the experience of those spaces. More importantly, there was something that felt like it wasn't celebrated. I always struggled with the teachings around our moon time in Indigenous culture, because even though it was expressed as if it was revered and valued, the felt sense of my gnosis was that there was still shame and discrimination and outcasting happening. It didn't hold the vibrational frequency that the words were nice, oh, you're in your special time, you're too powerful, da 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 da. But the essence of how it was transmitted did not translate into my body as I am celebrated and revered and welcomed here in my moon time. And so as I continued on the path in 2019, and some of you have been privy in the inner circle knowing just how painful this time was for me. I was in a relationship with a man that I dearly loved. And while I didn't know how to love him well or to love well in the relationship, I dearly loved him. We got pregnant and we had a very harrowing experience with a miscarriage. Um, and I will pin that there because it just feels like that's a story for another day. But this was a very heartbreaking experience. And while it brought us closer together in the beginning, eventually the grief that wasn't being processed was tearing us apart. And my actions and moreover, my reactions we're really sabotaging the relationship. And of course, there is a relationship with his behavior as well. I can only take 100% accountability for the role that I played in that. So one day I get home from taking my son to basketball practice, and my heart drops in my stomach because my knowing knew that he had left. There was some threats of it, but there was an actual admission that he had left. I get into the house. He's put together all of our stuffed animals and declares that this is our family. He's playing my Buddhist music, Master Jimbo's Bodhi's chanting, I guess, to help me ease the trauma of that situation. I'm with my 9-year-old son at the time, and more than anything, it was heartbreaking to walk in there after he had just established a relationship with this man and to hold it all together. And I couldn't really. I really struggled to hold it together. And I was very sad, and I did a lot of crying. It felt like a death was happening in me. And another important part of the story is, one day I'm on my knees in front of my altar praying to God, please help me to let him go. Please help me to let him go. And it was begging, but there was also surrender. And all of a sudden, I had this wash of peace come over me. And I decided to ask for help. And that was really hard for me to receive. I come from a lineage of women who have felt unsupported by men in their lives and therefore have become very controlling. And so their capacity to receive, which I also struggled with, um, they didn't know how. So they were very controlling. I go to my computer after this wash of peace comes over me, and I send an email out to all my friends, something that my therapist had already suggested that I do. And I let them know what was going on. And I remember feeling so much shame that I was in counseling training school at the time. And I remember feeling so much shame that this was my life, that this person who I loved dearly had left me. It was shameful. And so I had made a decision, partially inspired by Eat, Pray, Love, to cash in my RRSPs and go to Bali. And I really decided to date myself during these 2 months. I carved out time every day to play a song called Sleeping at Last. Um, well, by the artist Seattle by Sleeping at Last. I would play it, I would sit down, I'd bawl my eyes out, I would get sick, and then I would release that sickness. And pretty much that was a sign for my body that whatever I had been holding on for my whole lifetime, really, but probably lifetimes, and also before he left, I was working for the National Inquiry into Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women and Girls, and I was holding a lot of the stories that I was hearing as a statement gatherer and being a part of that process, which again is another story, but it was a very spiritual process beyond all the practical evidence that was gathered for the final report. It was you could feel their ancestors and their loved ones in the rooms really wanting the truth to come out, to be revealed. And this is an important part of the story because you have generations of Indigenous women who are being murdered and going missing at exponential rates compared to the rest of the population. So, as I will weave in later, there's this essence of a demonized feminine whose life somehow is not as worthy as the rest. So during this time, I meet a medicine man, a beautiful man who really just treats me like a daughter or a sister. And he takes me under his wing and he really takes care of me. He's training me, he's teaching me, he's helping me move through this grieving process. He's educating me. And I'm also reading this book called Return to the Heart of God, which is essentially a breakdown of A Course of Miracles in a digestible way. And I would travel back and forth between different places in Indonesia. And I had gone to, I forget where, but it was a place that was closer to the ocean because Ubud is not close to the ocean. So I went to this place, and one day I have this intuition that says to me, or sorry, I have this intuition that says to me, conversations with God. And it was a weird kind of intuition because I was like, I talk to God every day, like, what do you mean, God? I talk to you every day. I was writing in my journal every day. So then I go about to explore this little seaside town, and I go into this little mystical store, and I find there's a shelf of very few books, like probably less than that. And one of those books is Conversations with God, a book I had never heard about before in my life. So, of course, I listened to the message and I picked up the book. And I could not put that book down for 2 days. I read it front to back in my cute little space that I was living in there. And at the end of the book, it says something to the effect of, I have never left you. I have always loved you. And I just broke down in tears because here I am coming from this tragic, painful experience that I had been left, and I had been left by the love of my life. And in the flesh, it just felt like the most painful experience. Now I would say he wasn't the love of my life, but at the time that was the perception. You know how that can go. And this was a profound turning point in my life. So I continue on in this beautiful healing journey of dating myself in Bali. And this medicine man takes me to go stay with another medicine man in Java with his family. And he was teaching me many spiritual practices and giving me teachings and taking me to sacred places. And towards the end of my trip, I go to this place in Java with him and his family and my medicine man friend. And it's basically has a representation of many spiritual different practices. So if you're a Muslim, you could go there and do your prostrations. If you're participating in the Balinese ceremonies, you could do the water ceremonies. And and then there was a symbolism for Judaism. Like really there was everything for everyone there. And then I get to the feet of a statue of Jesus, and something in me brought me to my knees. And I started bawling my eyes out. There was so much, I was overwhelmed with so much love pouring out of me, pouring out of me, pouring out of me. It just felt like everything was coming together in all the pieces of the puzzle were trying to paint a bigger picture for me. And beside Jesus was a statue of Mother Mary. And the little girl from this family I was staying with says to this medicine man, Andy, what's going on? Like, what's going on with her? And he looks at her very calmly and says, she came all the way to Bali to return to the heart of God. So I didn't actually need a book. So why am I sharing this story? Many people these days are embracing Christianity. And I grew up Christian. I grew up in the church choir, which, as many of us know, has this essence of you got to be good. You got to, for being a female in this lifetime, I needed to be the good girl. And so I tried really, really hard to be the good girl growing up. And yet there was something in me that would always find ways to be perceived as bad, anyways. Like, and it makes sense now. And so who I want to talk about is Maria Magdalena. And with this rise of Christianity right now, I feel like it's a beautiful thing. We all have our own path to walk. And it feels important to me, and I'm being pushed now to speak out more about Maria Magdalena. And I know there are many others who are um, taking her into our consciousness. And I'd love to speak about Maria Magdalena in terms of an archetype. This is a archetypal story about how we can embody our own wholeness. Yes, our brain might need to view her as a real woman that lived how many thousands of years ago to be able to wrap our head around it. And if you're willing, the invitation is to just let your body guide you with whatever spiritual background you're a part of. If you're not a part of a spiritual background, that's fine. The invitation is to just feel if there's anything that is curious in you and sparks interest. So Maria Magdalena really has been with me my whole life. Although I did not have a cognitive idea of her. In ancient times, part of the goddess traditions in the rose lineage was about seeing our sacred sexuality as a way to experience union with another, right? Two bodies come together, that is union. And Maria Magdalena in these times was known as a womb priestess, a womb shaman. So in my childhood and my teenage years, I always felt like I didn't belong. I felt like an outcast. And perhaps you can relate. And I invite you to tune into where you can relate to feeling like you don't fit in, you don't belong. You're a rebel of sorts. And I know there are many of you out there like me. But never ever more did I feel like that than when I was exploited as a teenager from 13 to 16 in sex trafficking. So bear with me here as I do go kind of all over the place in the nonlinear consciousness. I, the ancient priestesses who were initiated in the temple of Isis and these sacred sexuality rites were the ones to give birth to kings, and were the ones to initiate kings into their kinghood, into their kingdom. Because in order to ascend, which would be what we know as Christianity and Christ in the fundamental religions, this very ascended, illuminated um, Christ masculine patriarchal way of understanding religion. In order to ascend, you need to descend. And so this is the left-hand path of the feminine Christ. So Maria Magdalena was part of the left-hand path of the feminine Christ. And Yeshua is the right-hand path of Christ consciousness. But it's not the problem with the last 2,000 years is that she has been left out of the story. And as we know in Catholicism and other religions, she's also been demonized. She went from her elevated state to a demonized, diminished, outcasted, degraded feminine. Maria Magdalena was wild in her love and wild in her rebellion. She was wild in her sexuality. If we look like, if we look at Mother Mary, she is one that we hear about in most fundamental religions because, in essence, she's a controllable feminine. She's the good mother. And under this patriarchal reign, there's no space for the wild, holy, Shakti feminine. There's no space for sexuality. And if we are to restore our wholeness in an embodied way, people need to start. Well, we don't need to do anything. That's not true. The invitation is, if there's a part of you that has always felt like something is missing in fundamental religions, then I would invite you to listen to that part. What is missing? Who is missing from the story? Why is it that Maria Magdalena was left out, not just left out, but demonized? The role that she played in the dissension for Christ, for Yeshu to embody his wholeness, first he had to descend into the shadows, into the humanity of what it's like to be human. And in order for him to be resurrected, first he needed to descend and then take his ascension with the resurrection, with what we know with the crucifixion and the following resurrection. So there is so much more to say on this. Part of what awoke in me was being trained as a Kundalini dance teacher, and that was a 9-month initiation where literally you are being initiated with the Kundalini energy through the chakras. So each chakra has dark shadow aspects, and you presence with them, you learn to love them, you learn to accept them, you learn to integrate them so that you can ascend, you can elevate the frequency of each chakra. So you start at the root and you move up to the sacral and you move up to the solar plexus and you move up to the heart. You move up to the higher heart and the throat and the third eye and the crown chakra. And this is the journey of remembering our wholeness. This is also taught in tantric, um, I want to say South Asian just to be politically correct, but in tantric Hinduism or tantric Buddhism, where wholeness is attained through Shakti, the feminine, the so-called lower chakras, which is not about being better or worse, being drawn up into the space of the heart, and the masculine coming down to meet in the heart. So he's descending, she's ascending. I feel that we are in a critical time in our growth and evolution, and we need to be more willing to see how the wild, holy feminine has been left out of the story in our lives, in our religions, in the patriarchal system. And who benefited from that? Who benefited from us not knowing how powerful we are? Because once we are integrated and embodied in our wholeness, we know just how powerful we are to be sovereign, to not be dependent on systems or people or even a priest. To have access to God, we realize that we have the capacity to co-create, to create the reality that we want. So on this Scorpio new moon, it just felt important for me to share this story, and I'm going to continue. I don't know if this made total sense. I'm just was willing to go with the flow, which is a very feminine way of being. And I was willing to not have to be so linear in the transmission. And this is just the beginning of my intention to continue to elevate the mythology and the archetypal information about our own enlightenment, our own integration of our wholeness. And we cannot do it if you are connected to a practice or a religion that only focuses on the masculine, only centralizes Jesus, then you're missing half of the story, because the left hand and the right hand coming together creates this sacred union. And why is it that we hold this in prayer? Why is it that we do this? Because they come together, and we cannot have wholeness until we are willing to allow them to come together in union. So I just wanted to share that. Maria Magdalena is she's such a huge symbol in my life of the importance of embodying the wild, holy feminine, who without her, and I'll get into this in future messaging, Christ would not have been resurrected. You cannot be resurrected into your wholeness if you don't first descend into the darkness. And their love, their union, he was the beloved. Maria Magdalena's beloved was Yeshua, Jesus. Jesus's beloved was Maria Magdalena. He was initiated in the temple of Isis. And if we trace back his time in Egypt, it invites curiosity how this story could not be true. His time with John the Baptist, how all of these teachings had to go underground because of the influence or infiltration of the Roman Catholic Church. And yet, throughout the ages, there have been Catholic priests and underground secret societies who have been holding these teachings as sacred. And I guess probably for a time like now, where our consciousness is ready to remember, right? So that's the descending. You're calling back all your parts, the ones that you cast out and say are bad. Well, especially the ones that you cast out and say that are bad. And this is another problem with fundamental religions. How can you be whole if you're only willing to look at the good? If you're only willing to tell a person that you must you must be good, sexuality is bad. You're leaving out a whole aspect of who you are that is asking for your love and your compassion in order to be welcomed back home. So if you ever get this sense that there's something missing, or you're going to church every week and repenting, but there's still something that feels like it's missing, then I just invite you to be curious about how the archetype and mythology of Maria Magdalena and the integration of our sacred feminine might be the answer, and how their love story, Yeshua and Maria Magdalena, has codes and keys to unlock this gnosis, this knowing, which is feminine, this gnosis, this knowing within you. If you're ready, if you're willing. So on the Scorpio new moon, this is my truth, and it feels like a big deal to come out and reveal myself in this way. It feels like a really big deal. And just on another note to close, in the work that I do in extraordinary relationships, as a psychedelic therapist, as a Kundalini dance teacher, which I've evolved into Tantra dance just to speak more to that union of the masculine and the feminine. In breath work, these transmissions come through from an embodied, initiated priestess, and someone who's gone through the teachings or the lineage of the Temple of Isis or the Maria Magdalena teachings has had to walk through major darkness and learn to love and accept those parts. so that we can give a true embodied transmission of the way of love. It's not something that, you know, can be understood if you're only willing to look at the masculine side of things or to be in patriarchal energetic frequencies, which much of Christianity is right now. If you're only willing to be in patriarchal frequencies, then you'll never be whole. Because it's an embodied transmission, and it means the invitation is that each one of us takes up, the Holy Grail and goes on your vision quest, goes on your hero's journey, slays the dragons, which were never on the outside. The dragons are these perceived bad parts of ourselves within us that are asking to be faced and felt and forgiven and loved, more importantly. Welcomed home. And that is the left-hand path of the feminine Christ. Okay. Until we meet again. Whatever lands for you, great. Leave the rest behind. I invite you to really tune into what your path is, what is important to you in spirituality or religion, and just see if there is space for this to be there as well. Okay. Lots of love. Bye.